saving Western civilization. I don't want to do this. I don't want to do this. I don't want to save Western civilization. What is Western civilization? What is Western traditionalism? What is American nationalism? American nationalism is supporting the nation founded by George Washington, the Freemason, and all his Freemasonic brothers. So that's American nationalism. Saving the West. What is the West? I mean, I trace it back to Rudolph II. You could pick a different point in time. But, you know, European traditionalism, the European elite, people talk about, oh, this hostile elite, this parasitic elite that's subverting our traditions. How long has that been going on? Because all these trends, oh, anti-Christian elite, I mean, occultist elite, Satanist, you know, Alex Jones talks about this. And I would say, well, go back to Rudolph II. So we've got 500 years now of these hostile anti-Christian elites, these occultist elites, you know, pseudo-Masonic elites. And this is the Western tradition. This is the American tradition. So people who call themselves Western chauvinists or people who call themselves American nationalists, you would have to be internally consistent, you would have to be a Freemasonic occultist. Now, you know, someone like Styx Hexenhammer, I think, is one of the few people who actually recognizes this. And I think maybe Augustus Invictus or someone like that. But, you know, a way around this, I guess, is someone who's like, oh, I'm a white nationalist, and therefore I reject the European tradition. And some Christians do this as well. People like Pastor Anderson, they reject the Western canon. They reject Halloween. They reject perhaps even Christmas. Oh, Christmas is really a pagan holiday, or something like this. Or they reject the Catholic Church. You have all these Protestants who reject Catholicism. So all this rejection of the past, people who embrace the past, people say, make America again. They're pro-Trump, but they don't know what Western civilization is. People who say, I'm for the Western tradition, I'm for the white race. What is the core of whiteness? The core of whiteness is leftism. And here's the question. Here's the Mr. Cool Monkey's hammer. You know, he talks about me hammering the point and being repetitive. You know, and of course I call other people discursive. I myself am discursive, so he's allowed to do that. But he's been hammering me, and Hector Quinn has been hammering me. And he says, who is really the true right-wing person? He says, who wants to advocate the death of everyone except for a few autists? And my argument is that no one is purely right-wing, no one is purely left-wing. There's a spectrum. And I'm pointing out that there are endpoints to this spectrum, and that no one, or very few people, actually approach the endpoints. Most people are somewhere in the middle. In the same way that the political spectrum, most people are moderates. You know, the difference between Republican and Democrat is very slight. They're both very similar. They're just slightly different. And that's basically how everything is. I mean, humanity, we're all very similar. My entire point is that the left is evolution, the right is atrophy. Where does that leave us? How does this relate to anything? Well, it's very relevant because I'm tired, frankly. I'm tired of being associated with people who want to save Western civilization. They want to save the white race. They want to save America. They want to make America great again. All these people, they don't know what Western civilization is. They don't know the Indo-European tradition. They don't know anything. They're ignorant. They've got skinhead numbers. They've got slogans. They've got, you know, a bunch of... It's a fringe right-wing movement, right? It's a dogmatic movement, but the dogma is based on nothing but mantras and incorrect heuristics. I mean, it's like the Flat Earth. I mean, the Flat Earth movement has been around for a while. People have been talking about a Flat Earth for perhaps hundreds of years, saying, oh, you know, this idea of a globe is wrong. So there have been people who have been promoting the Flat Earth for 100 or 200 years. I don't know the exact history of it. But they push it and they have a dogma. And they continue to push their dogma. And to me, the Flat Earth movement is very similar to the white nationalist movement. They've got a dogma. They adhere to their dogma. They're not very smart. And they just keep pushing the same thing over and over. So people are getting tired of me pushing this idea just for a few videos. I've made a few videos. You don't have to watch the videos. No one's forcing you to watch the video. I don't know why you're watching the video. You know, Hector Quinn, you know, says anyone who watches my videos, it probably is a broken person, something wrong with them. It's like, why are you still watching the video? I mean, that's sad. That's sad, Hector. This is the problem. These pessimists, these right-wing pessimists, these Spanglerian pessimists who look at the world and they're like, oh gosh, everything's terrible, everything's horrible. And, you know, if you don't like the trend that life is going in, you're probably not going to be part of the living much longer. You know, a right-wing person is the type of person who says, we just need to have more babies. And that type of person is not going to win. Because really, if you think about it, the people who are having all the babies, if you have a bunch of babies, you can have your parental rights revoked by the state. They can be kidnapped, put through public school, or they can go to the church where they're going to learn the mainstream ideology. So just having kids, just passing on your genetic lineage, is just a sort of a ejaculatory thing. It's just you're spurting out these kids, but you have no mythological dominance to back it up. See, children are not raised by parents. Children are raised by society. So if you don't have mythological dominance over society, your children are not being raised by you, they're being raised by society. And you see this if you actually do sociological research or anthropology. And doing anthropology of white nationalism, look at it as a cult, and look at these people, some of these famous white nationalists, George Lincoln Rockwell, I could name a few others. And it's almost painful to point out these people. But, you know, this is not a stable movement. It's not an intergenerational movement. A lot of people who come out of this, it's either they're extremely right-wing, they're extremely dogmatic, and so they have the cultic ability to reject society and embrace their parents because they have a low IQ, or it's people who are coming to this because they hate their parents. So there's a lot of different problems with the intergenerationality of it. There is no mythic dominance, and the myths aren't very deep and they're not very strong. These people don't know any of the when they talk about make America great, America's a Freemasonic state. They talk about, you know, the Indo-Europeans. Well, the Indo-Europeans were revolutionaries and leftists, and their mythology was about overturning tyranny, not about dictators, and not about, you know, dogma. The Indo-Europeans, some of the least dogmatic people on the face of the planet. And so, you know, I want to continue to talk about left versus right because I made the mistake, I think, of associating myself with the right wing. I made that mistake. And with all things, whenever we talk about moderation, or we can say, well, you know, the left is right about a couple things, the right wing's right about a couple things, we should just be centrists, we should be moderates. That's not really how the discussion gets pushed forward. Really, the way discussions work, and you go back to the Greek dialogues and Plato, really the way that discussions work is someone puts forth a radical principle, that's the thesis, and then you have an antithesis, which is the radical opposite, and then there's some kind of synthesis. So my participation in this dialectic is not to just put out the moderate centrist position of like, yeah, I guess the right wing has a few good points, the left wing has a few good points, and I'm a moderate, I'm a centrist. I think there's something productive in declaring yourself to be left wing and to putting yourself on that side of the dialectic and making people think in a new way. And you could make all kinds of pragmatic arguments about it. You could say, well, you know, really it's all about deconstructing and creating a culture of critique. It's about deconstructing the mainstream narrative that Trump is a right-winger and that Goldman Sachs is left-wing, I guess. You know, that idea. And that's something that white nationalists continually reinforce. And that's why I oppose them, because they're constantly reinforcing the dominant mythology. They're saying things like, oh, well, Hitler was right-wing and Trump is right-wing, and these are all the right-wing people. And to be right-wing means to be white, and white is right-wing conservative, and they've evangelical conservative and free market, and you tie all these ideas together in a nice little bundle of sticks. And then you've got the left, and the left is Jewish, and the left is black, and the left is mestizo. and you've then associated the right with status quo thinking, with being dumb, with being a redneck, with having lots of kids, all these behaviors, and just being dogmatic, not questioning, not subverting, and then you associate the left with evolution, and this is a game that the mainstream plays. The mainstream wants you to believe this. And then white nationalists just reinforce that. And they say, yeah, that's absolutely true. You know, those Jews, they're so subversive, and we don't want to be like the Jews. We don't want to be subversive. And that's something that gets hammered into people's minds. And then it creates a psychological, there's a cognitive dissonance when you set up this situation. And I've seen it, I think Andy Nowicki correctly pointed this out. He said, you know, all you white nationalists, you say you hate the Jews because they're ethnocentric, and then your response is to be more ethnocentric. How is that consistent? How does that make any sense? So, you know, there's just a lot of problems here. There's a lot of stupidity here. And you can criticize what I'm saying as, I mean, what are the criticisms? The criticisms are, how does this relate to anything? It relates to everything. I mean, this is the daily meat and potatoes of what people, this is constantly, in fact, people have to constantly say, please don't bring up politics. Please don't bring up politics. This is a constant thing. And I don't even know what this one is about. This is about truth and spirituality, skepticism. We should be skeptical. We should be skeptical. We shouldn't be. We do need to dissect. We do need to dissect. And I've been investigating back and forth these different things, and I just don't see. I feel like the right wing is burned out. I feel like the right wing has reached its potential. The alt-right, it's reached its potential. It's reached its cap. And you take any one right-wing group, and it's capped at about 100,000 people. And that's not enough, because you got 300 some odd million people in the United States. And so, you know, out of 300 million, you've got much less than 1%. You're going to need a lot more than 1%. You're going to need a lot more than 3 million people in any given group. And it doesn't have to be a centralized, it can be a decentralized group. But show me one of these, quote unquote, you know, add up all the different groups. There's so much overlap between the different groups. But any kind of estimate of numbers, you're getting very small, either very small numbers, or you're getting very dumb people. People who are not smart, people who are dogmatic, people who are like, well, you know, Hitlerism doesn't work, so we just need to be even more evil than Hitler. Like, these people have that, we have to be more violent, we have to be more abrasive, we have to be more racist. You know, in Nazi Germany, you could be a quarter Jewish, and nothing bad would happen to you. They'd leave you alone. They'd say, you know, you're basically a German. And then these white nationalists say, well, Hitler didn't win because he wasn't fanatical enough, he wasn't crazy enough. So they just have to take that one step further, and that's kind of like the definition of insanity, right? Something hasn't worked, and you just want to push it even further and say, well, you know, it didn't work, so we got to push it even further. And I think these people don't understand the movement of technology and the movement of class and the feedback loop between the two. It's not addressed at all. I mean, it's really not addressed at all. It's really not thought of. It's more of an afterthought. And gonna heart that comment by Rattle Grebdron. I'm going to heart this comment by Maximilian Morel. And what else can we do? There's I'm going to heart this comment by Mr. Trad. Is this good content? Is this a nice little video? Is this what we enjoy? Yes, Democrats, Hollywood actors are the real right-wingers. So true. You know, when the alt-right says something like Democrats are the real racists, Democrats are the real fascists, they would not say that if it was not effective. When you turn a mythological narrative on its head, that creates interest. People are interested in that. You're taking the dominant because we've been told for so long that the left wing is on the right side of history. And that's true. The left wing is always on the right side of history. So if you want to be on the right side of history, it's time to join the left wing. You're tapping into an existing semantic narrative, and it works. And it repels a lot of stupid people who, you know, they use skinhead numbers, and they do some just stupid stuff. It's like, you know, the kind of stuff where, let's say, you're existing in a space where you're an oppressed minority, and it's advantageous for you to have freedom of speech, and someone asks you and they say, now, do we really support freedom of speech? And you say, no, of course, when we take power, we're just going to shut down freedom of speech. That's the kind of stupidity you get out of the right wing. People who identify as right wing, they're so arrogant, and I have to reject that. I have to say, you need people who can think on multiple... I mean, people accuse, right, you know, this is a slur against the Jewish people. That people say, oh, the Jews have a dual morality. And they say that as if it's somehow bad. I mean, you should have multiple levels of morality. In the same way that the old European aristocrats, they would say, I speak German to my horse, I speak French to my women, I speak English to the taxpayer. You know, you have different languages for different people. And so, in a sense... And this is sort of a concept in Hinduism, that you have different moral codes, you have a different dharma for different classes of society and different kinds of people. You apply different sort of moral codes to them because they have different positions, different jobs, different operations. So I want to repel people. I do want to repel people. I am tired of people swarming, and this is, you know, it's my fault. Right? So I'm trying to turn the vehicle here. The vehicle, we have inertia, we've been going in one direction, but I'm looking out at the horizon and I'm seeing this is going nowhere. We're not getting closer to our destination. And the destination is progress. And how do you define that? Well, you know, it's what are we gaining from this? What are we making people think? Are we making people smarter? Are we increasing our agency? Are we progressing? Are we doing new things that haven't been done before? Or are we just retreading old ground? And so I'm looking at, you know, how far can you take the right wing and just pushing the right wing and going backwards and say, oh, well, we just need to repeat what these right-wing people did, but just do it 1,000 times harder with 1,000 times more fanaticism, and then it will work. I'm like, that's not really how evolution works. You know, the dinosaurs, perhaps they were hit by an asteroid, I don't know. But some environmental change occurred, and so you had some dinosaurs who, they didn't have a conscious mind, but let's for the sake of argument, assume that they did. So there could be some dinosaurs that were like, hey, you know what, we're all dying in the millions, so maybe the solution is we just become more dinosaur than ever before. But then you have some other small lizard-type dinosaurs, and they're like, hey, maybe we should sort of go off and become more mammalian and do a totally different thing. And some dinosaurs are like, you know what, all the dinosaurs are dying, so let's just be bigger and badder and more dinosaur, more ferocious, bigger teeth, bigger tails, everything, just more and more and more. And then some said, no, no, no. It's not that we should be more dinosaurs, that we should do a totally different thing. That we should be little critters, we should be little mammalian creatures. And this to me is kind of a class distinction. That the dinosaur was a warrior type, and the little mammal, I don't know what type he was. He certainly wasn't a warrior type. He's like some little kind of, I mean, in the analogy, of course, now all animals relative to humans are a warrior type, and to a certain extent. You can look at social animals like ants and bees and insects, and they actually, like the queen bee is sort of a priest type. She just reproduces, which is very similar to the media. The media puts out a message in the form of memes, whereas the queen bee puts out a genetic code, and that instructs her worker bees on what to do. So the worker bees are sort of the warrior type. And then you have, I suppose, a merchant type would be the drones who fly around and spread their seed in that way. You know, and you could critique the analogy, you could reformulate it in a better way. This is all off the cuff. But yeah, I don't advocate when the asteroid is coming down. the asteroid of technology, you don't say, let's just be more dinosaur than ever before. Let's have bigger teeth and bigger tails and bigger scales and just be bigger, badder, meaner, tougher. And that's what the right wing advocates. It says, well, you know, the white nationalists of the past, they just weren't mean and tough enough, and we just got to be more vicious and more ironic and more sad, basically. It's sad. I'm saying, no, let's not even push that anymore, because that doesn't have a future. If you want a future, you need to totally go back to the drawing board and reformulate. And you know, some people would say that's a betrayal of principles. That's why, in my mind, we need to be asking, what is our telos? What do we really want? What is the purpose of all this? You know, one of the propositions or assumptions of the right wing is that the right wing is majoritarian. The right wing says, in order to be happy, we need to be a majority. We need to have our own countries. We need our own ethno-states. We need some level of normativity. We need to be white majoritarians. We need a 90% white majority country. And I look at a country like Iceland, which demographically, I mean, why not move to Iceland? If this is what you really want, if this is the only important thing, if this is the most important thing, move to Iceland. But these people aren't moving to Iceland, because that's not what they care about. So there must be something else that they care about, and they're really lying. They're lying to themselves, they're lying to everybody else about what's really important. The important thing is not demographic dominance. It never has been. It never will be. The important thing is mythological dominance. Whoever dominates mythologically ultimately wins. That's who wins. If you dominate mythologically, I mean, look at the cows of India. The cows of India have a kind of mythological dominance. Now, they didn't create the mythological dominance. It was bestowed upon them. But they have this mythological dominance. You can't kill cows in India. They just walk around. So, you know, people who are able to create mythological dominance or benefit from it, or have this mythological dominance bequeathed to them, they get the power. They have the power. If you don't have any form of mythological dominance, you don't have power. It doesn't matter how many babies you have. I mean, you know, look at how these, you know, you have a lot of violent people out there, and they have violent fantasies, and they think like, hey, you know, white people could just take over. If white people just got serious, if white people all became racist and supremacist, if white people became sadistic, then white people could do anything, because look, we have all this technological power. We could just take over the world. We could do whatever we want. We could wipe out populations and totally replace the entire continents. And white people in the past did that. They replaced, you know, I mean, Australia is a majority white continent. South America, you know, is perhaps not a majority white continent, but the genetic profile, and you can go look it up yourself. Argentina is a majority white country. You know, there are some others. Colombia is like a 56% white country, etc., etc. We can go down the line. You know, Mexico is ruled by white people. White people rule Mexico. Most of the presidents of Brazil are white. So there is a kind of white supremacy in Brazil. There is a kind of, there's a white majority in Australia. Certainly in North America, traditionally, there's been a white majority. So Europeans did do this in the past. But look at what's happening today. None of that matters. That demographic, people say, oh, demographics is destiny. That's not true. Because for hundreds of years, North America, Australia, South America, these were continents that were being Europeanized. They were being colonized by Europeans. And demographically, they shifted. They went from an Aboriginal population to a European population very quickly within the span of a couple hundred years. So that was a massive transformation for these continents to make, and Europeans were at the center of that. Europeans are now resented for their role. Now, where does that resentment come from? It comes from mythology. It comes from mythology. You'll know if you look at a lot of these South Americans, for instance, they had gods with beards and white skin and blue eyes. Now, we can speculate. Maybe that's an accident, right? Maybe the South Americans, it was just a coincidence. Maybe the South Americans were just like, hey, you know what would be weird? You know, maybe we'll have some gods with horns. We'll have another god that looks like a snake. And then we'll have some gods and we'll just put like some hair on his chin and make his eyes blue and his skin white. Even though we've never seen anyone like that before, we're just going to make up some silly gods that look like that. People make up silly looking gods all the time. I mean, the gods of the ancient Greeks were blonde-haired and red-haired and blue-eyed and green-eyed. And so maybe it's all just a coincidence, right? So I'm not even going to go into that. It could be a coincidence, it could not be. But either way, you know, they had a mythological conception that these people who were demographically different from them were actually somehow superior to them. And then, you know, of course, Europeans came over, and that sort of, you know, there was a coalescence, or there was a synchronicity between this historical event, Europeans coming over, and this mythological concept of the gods sort of looking like Europeans. And so that's, you know, the effect of white supremacy that did occur during European colonization was at that time mythologically sanctioned both by a lot of the Aboriginal myths, or the native myths, and by Christianity and Catholicism that came in. And Christianity and Catholicism had no problem with the idea of a multi-ethnic white supremacist society. They had no problem with that. You know, who cares if everyone in the upper classes, everyone who's rich is white? Didn't concern the Catholic Church at the time. Now you can look at some of the Jesuits and some of the stuff that went on in the 1800s where they said, we need to start converting these natives to Christianity. We need to start creating converts out of them, and they need some form of self-rule, and they were instrumental in the independence movement. So we could look into all of that, right? Certainly that does exist. But basically the argument I'm making is that if you're mythologically dominant, then demographics doesn't matter. That sort of, in this sense, memes come before genes, and that genes are really just a particular kind of meme. The meme, at the end of the day, is a signifier of information. And so, to my mind, gene theory is a subset of meme theory, not the other way around. Once you understand that the memes are primary, if you have a country, let's say South Africa or Rhodesia, and you have mythological dominance, and everyone believes that it's okay that white people are at the top, then it doesn't matter. Demographics doesn't really matter. Now, if you have a situation in which the mythology is anti-white, and you live in Iceland, you're going to have a bad future ahead of you. And, you know, again, go to Iceland. It's a beautiful country. I encourage people to travel there and look and see what's going on. But Iceland has a bad future because mythologically, it's an anti-white country, even though it's extremely, extremely white. I mean, demographically, genetically, it's extremely white, but mythologically, mimetically, it's headed in a totally different direction. You know, it's a very small island, and if they accept any form of refugees, which is very difficult, how do you even get refugees to Iceland? The problem of transportation is enormous. But you start getting even a small number of people to come in, they're already mythologically primed to say, oh, well, we don't have any problem with that, you know. And so, you know, someone could criticize the whole argument I've laid out here and say, well, you know, that's all white nationalism is. It's a mimetic way to you know, secure our genetic lineage or something like that. And you know, I guess that's a legitimate argument to address what I'm saying here. But you know, at the end of the day, when you think about take Judaism or Mormonism, minoritarian religions, not right wing, they're minoritarian. I'm not a majoritarian, I'm a minoritarian. So let's look at Judaism and Mormonism. Are they racially exclusive? Now, Mormonism previously was. You could not be a black Mormon, or you could not be a black Mormon priest or something like that. You know, Joseph Smith was a racist. So there was a racial exclusivity that fell away. Are the Mormons today racially exclusive? No. Anyone can join Mormonism of any race. However, is there a racial component to Mormonism? Yes. Mormonism is overwhelmingly blonde-haired, blue-eyed, Anglo-Saxon descent, Northern European. Now let's look at Judaism. Is Judaism racially exclusive? No. Technically, theoretically, anyone can convert to Judaism. Also, anyone, if you have a Jewish woman, she can marry a black man, and the women, or the children, will be Jewish. A Jewish woman could marry an Asian man, and the children would be Jewish according to rabbinical law. And so those children could then adopt Judaism as their religion and be part of the synagogue, be part of the community. And there's actually a movie, I don't even remember the name of it, but it's a movie where an Asian Jew comes to New York as a rabbi. Now there is some like obscurely small Jewish population in China, and they look Asian, and so it's like everyone's surprised. They're like, I didn't know that rabbis could be Asian. But, you know, it's a feel-good story because he's welcome into the community. Everyone learns a lesson about inclusivity and equality and whatever. But the whole premise of that movie is supremely racist. The idea that people are shocked. I mean, imagine if you were in a Christian church and people are just shocked that the pastor was Asian, or people are shocked that the pastor was black. That would be racist. But Jews are allowed to be shocked, you know, so it is normative in Judaism to have Caucasian Semitic rabbis. Not black rabbis, not Asian rabbis. It's possible. So it's not an exclusive religion. So this concept of racial exclusivism to me is autistic. And to me, it takes away from the power of the memetics. If all you care about is the genes, well, you know, there are white people with Down syndrome. There are white people on opiates. There are white people who have all kinds of problems. And that's why I think, problematically, white nationalism attracts all kinds of broken white people. Because they're like, well, you know, yeah, objectively, I'm a pretty messed up, broken person, but at least I can hold on to my whiteness. That's a problem. If you don't put values first, if you don't put memes first, then you run the risk of attracting a lot of people whose only merit is their heritage. And that's also the problem with aristocracy, why I oppose the right wing and why I call myself a leftist. I oppose the aristocracy. I oppose Kaiser Wilhelm II. Now, Kaiser Wilhelm II, he might be able to look back in his ancestral tree and say, hey, look, I'm descended from Charlemagne. I'm descended from all these great European heroes. That gives me the right to rule. But Kaiser Wilhelm, he had a withered arm, and he was pretty stupid and arrogant, and he was just a terrible ruler. So I don't want to be ruled by Kaiser Wilhelm. I don't. And people who like Kaiser Wilhelm, it's sad. It's sad. He's a sad man. And he did a lot of terrible things, and I don't like him, and you shouldn't like him. Furthermore, Bismarck, the sycophant, Bismarck brought in merchants. He made the Second Reich into a merchant empire. The First Reich was in many ways a spiritual empire, in that there was a concept that the emperor was allowed to appoint bishops. That then came into question with the investiture contest in the 11th century. There was a big contest between the Pope and the Emperor, who's allowed to appoint bishops. But it was founded on spiritual principles. Later, so the First Reich essentially disintegrates and passes away. Then you have the Second Reich. The Second Reich is a banking empire. It's a merchant empire. It's the fastest growing economy in Europe by many standards. It's all about building railroads and getting loans from the Rothschilds and other bankers. And you can look up the names. It wasn't just the Rothschilds. That's just the big name everyone knows. Many others that, you know, someday I should do a deep dive on. And Otto von Bismarck was in bed with all these people. He loved these people. He loved bankers. He said, oh, the empire will be built on blood and iron. Really what he should have said, it's built on gold and iron. It's built on merchandising, which allows us to put down steel tracks for our railroads. He was all into the build. He married the aristocracy to the merchant class. And the reason why, if you look at America, the American support in World War I was for Germany. They supported Germany against Russia because Russia was more of a warrior class, more of a spiritual class, and they were anti-Semitic. There's a lot of problems with Russia. And they supported Germany as the modern banking empire, the empire of finance. Then Russia collapses, and it looks like they're going to be communist or democratic or whatever. And so it's like, whoa, stop attacking Russia. And then the tables turn where it's like the lesser of two evils becomes Russia rather than Germany, and everything flips on its head. And they're like, whoa, we can't allow Germany to monopolize all this land in Eastern Europe because then it would be this monopoly power, and that would be bad for international finance. So Germany, the Second Reich, Otto von Bismarck, Kaiser Wilhelm II, they were tools of international finance. They were tools of the merchant class. And then when they lost their usefulness, when Russia was brought to its knees, that was the purpose of the war, to destroy Russia. They brought Russia to its knees, and then they said, we don't need you anymore, and it's time to clean up the mess. You know, Germany had been exhausted by that point, and so then they brought in America to clean up the mess. So it was totally calculated, and it has these class motivations behind it. And, you know, the question you have to ask yourself is, do you want to go hide in the woods? Do you want to be a nationalist? Do you want to be a majoritarian? Do you want to be an aristocrat? Do you want to support monarchy and things like that? And I hear people saying that, and I want to disassociate from those people, and I want to argue against those people. And the way that I signal my disagreement with these people, who I think their ideology is totally ineffective, totally dinosaurish, it's totally Paleolithic. When I want to distance myself from these people, I think it's a good idea to call myself a leftist. And it seems to be effective. It seems to be angering people, seems to be annoying people. They say, that's not what right-wing and left-wing means. Well, tell me. Everyone tells me, oh, that's not what it means. You can't give me your definition. They say, oh, well, really, you're talking about liberalism and conservatism. Well, that's what colloquially right-wing and left-wing mean. That's what it means in a colloquial sense, and I argue that's what it means in a deep sense. People are saying, no, 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 the colloquial sense is wrong, your explanation is wrong, so what's the right explanation? I actually don't say that militias are left-wing. This is 3 days ago. Was the Confederacy left-wing? Was the Confederacy left-wing? I mean, there are certainly left-wing aspects to the Confederacy. The concept of separation. The way that they looked at, the mainstream mercantile empire of the North versus a more religious, look at the Southern aristocracy. The Southern aristocracy was a landed class. And anytime you have a landed class as the aristocracy, there is a kind of warrior notion to that. So the Southern aristocracy, they're more landed, they're more rural, they're more warrior type. The Northern aristocracy, more mercantile, more financial. And so there is that class war there. And so you could make the argument that the Confederacy was more left-wing and the Union was more right-wing. But then there's a kind of a wider argument you could make, and you could say, well, really, when we look at left versus right, a lot of times we're talking about class. And this is kind of a Marxist or a communist argument, but reformulated. Instead of talking about bourgeoisie and proletariat, we're talking about merchant class versus warrior class to a great degree. So when these classes come into conflict, and we could go back to the Paleolithic versus the Neolithic. The Paleolithic were the warrior class. The Neolithic were kind of a merchant class. And in that situation, the left wing, the forward-moving, the progressive-sided people were the Neolithic merchant class. And they beat out the urbanism of the Neolithic merchant class beat out the right-wing Paleolithic class. And maybe class is the wrong word to use, but I'm just going to go with it. So they beat them out, and so the left wing ultimately wins there. And then the left wing and the merchant class continues to have victories through the Roman Empire, through Christianity, through the Industrial Revolution up to the present day. So in that sense, you could say the Union was left-wing because it was more merchant class and the Confederacy was right-wing. And the question people should be asking is, does this mean that you support the merchant class? Well, I think, to me, the merchant class is you're getting away from the traditional warrior class, right? When we talk about the difference, but what defines the merchant class is trying to find solutions. It's trying to calculate solutions to problems. Now, what is the teleology of the merchant class? It can be consumerism. It can be just, how do we support this hedonic need? And in that sense, there's something deeply destructive about the merchant class in the moment. That there are a lot of short-term losses. I mean, if you get into this merchant morality, this merchant teleology, this merchant ethos, then the way you look at life is like, well, it's all about just gaining pleasure. And so you're going to work your whole life to get a nice car and to get nice women and to get all these things that are transient. And you might acquire all these goods, and they're not doing anything for the future. So that's a problem. But then you can look at the merchant class in a different way. And the different ways you can look at the merchant class as it is solving problems of calculation, solving economic problems, solving market problems in order to bring us into a new civilizational state. So again, I would say, like, Urbanism is left-wing. Ruralism is right-wing. So the shift from a Paleolithic society to a Neolithic society, that was a shift from right-wing to left-wing. The left wing was instrumental in creating that shift. And these kind of revolutions happen throughout history up until the present day, and they're continuing to happen. And we're shifting basically to a post-human mode. I mean, the Homo sapiens as a Paleolithic hunter-gatherer had been around in various, we could talk about the Neanderthals, the Homo sapiens, Australopithecus. We could talk about these different humanoids, and they were existing as hunter-gatherers for possibly millions of years. I mean, primates have existed for millions of years as hunter-gatherers. So, I mean, most life on the planet, most animals are hunter-gatherers. Now, you could say ants, for instance, sort of farm aphids. So ants actually act as kind of pastoralists, and we could look at different insects. And whenever you have a collective system, ants are kind of mercantile in that sense. They're solving problems of calculation in that sense. So we can look at certain insect species and social species and collective species. They have this sort of hive mind, and that in itself is interesting to look at. We should look into that. I'd love to talk to a biologist who could give a smoother take on these things, because I'm not trained as a biologist. But there's clearly some analogies there to make. But we have this move from the Paleolithic to the Neolithic, this move from the rural to the urban, from the hunter-gatherer to the farmer. And that is a kind of a mercantile shift. And I see this whole process the last 10,000 years as we're shifting away from the way that most animals, most mammals, most primates have been doing things for millions, if not billions of years, for a long time. They've been doing it for quite a long time, and now we're shifting into a whole different mode. In fact, we're moving away from perhaps even DNA, right? We're moving from DNA as the source, the way that, I mean, DNA is essentially the code in the same way that Python is a code, C++ is a code, Java is a code. We're moving away from, we moved from RNA to DNA. Now we're moving from DNA to something else. And perhaps it's going to be organic life forms, perhaps it's going to be inorganic, but we're moving toward either artificial intelligence or genetic augmentation. This is what Alex Jones talks about, and he talks about it from this right-wing perspective of like, oh my god, they're trying to destroy humanity, they're mixing humans with pigs, and they're modifying our genetics, and they're creating, Google's and artificial intelligence, and it's basically Satan. And he's saying it's Satan. Who is Satan, by the way? What is Shaitan? What is he? Is he the opposer? I want to know the etymology of Satan. Who is Satan? Also known as the devil. But I want to know the figure Satan. He is a heavenly prosecutor, a member of the sons of God subordinate to Yahweh, who prosecutes the nation of Judah in heavenly court, tests the loyalty of Yahweh's followers by forcing them to suffer. Due to the Zoroastrian influence of the figure of Angra Mainyu, Satan developed into a malevolent entity with abhorrent qualities. Then there's, in the apocryphal Book of Jubilees, which is, I've never read, that's an interesting, I mean, there's a lot of interesting stuff to read here. Satan tempts Jesus, so Satan has... He's a seducer. He is a great red dragon. He is also known as the devil. Shaitan. So he's an evil spirit. And I want to know that, not that necessarily the historical development is interesting. So here we go to the Hebrew. Satan is a generic noun meaning accuser or adversary. The word is derived from a verb meaning primarily to obstruct or to oppose. This is interesting, because actually, if we were to take these words, obstruction, opposition, accusation, these are words that describe Alex Jones, right? He's trying to obstruct the New World Order. He's trying to oppose globalism. He's an adversary. He's an accuser. He's accusing these people of doing all these terrible things. So... this is interesting. But there is a sort of a Luciferian concept of Satan. And this Luciferian concept is one in which Satan is a Promethean figure. He's someone who revolts against God. And the revolt of Satan against God, to me, seems very, very similar to the revolt of Zeus against his father, or of Odin against the giants. The revolt of Satan against God. Now, the problem, I guess, in the Hebrew, tradition is that Satan doesn't take over. Whereas in the Norse tradition, Odin takes over, the Aesir take over, they become the dominant power. And in the Mediterranean tradition of the Greeks and the Romans, Zeus, or Jupiter, the father of the gods, he takes over, the Olympians take over as the main power. Whereas in Judaism, maybe Satan, or Christianity, Satan revolts against God, and he sort of has temporal power over the earth. He's the prince of this world, but he doesn't have permanent victory, and he's continuously opposed by the true God, which is Yahweh. And Gnostics have their own interpretation with the demiurge, and so they try to take the Hebrew tradition and try to reverse things or invert things so that it fits with the Indo-European tradition. And so this is something that I'm not trying to advocate for Satanism here. I'm not trying to advocate for that, but I'm trying to speak mythologically. I'm trying to look at different aspects. Where is Satan right wing or is he left wing? Is he right wing or left wing? I mean, in a lot of ways, I would say Satan is left wing. I don't think people necessarily would have to disagree with that. I think a lot of anti-Christians would say, yeah, Satan's left wing. A lot of pro-Christian people would say Satan is left wing. And who is Satan? Satan is someone who comes bringing revolution. He comes bringing, here's Mormon views on the devil. Devil offered to be the redeemer of mankind for the sake of his own glory. Satan becomes rebellious. So Satan is a rebel. Satan is a new kind of a person. He's a new being. He's something new. So whenever we have something new, whenever we have an emergent artificial intelligence, a merchant class, something biologically new, there's a concept that this is somehow satanic. Let's see. The Arabic equivalent for the word Satan is shaitan. The word itself is an adjective meaning astray or distant, sometimes translated as devil, can be applied both to man and to demons or jinn, which is sometimes also translated as genie. In the Quran, Satan's name is Iblis, probably a derivative of the Greek word diabolos. And that's, of course, where we get Spanish diablo. Muslims do not regard Satan as the cause of evil, but as a tempter who takes advantage of humans' inclination towards self-centeredness. So again, we're getting into Islam here. I've made the argument, I've made the case against converting to Islam, but it's not something that I shy away from. We can read about what Islam thinks in this case. What is the Baha'i faith? Satan is not regarded as an independent evil power. He represents the lower nature. Lower nature is described as Satan. And then we have some allegations. The main deity in the tentatively Indo-European pantheon of the Yazidis. The Yazidis are people who have been persecuted by ISIS and Israel. Some of them identify as ethnic Kurds. Melek Taus is one of the central figures. He's similar to the devil. He refused to bow down before humanity. Christians and Muslims often consider Melek Taus to be Satan. Yazidism can be understood as a remnant of pre-Islamic Middle Eastern Indo-European religion. That is a spicy set of words there. Pre-Islamic Middle Eastern Indo-European religion. and or a Gulat Sufi movement. There is no entity in Yazidism which represents evil in opposition to God. Such dualism is rejected by Yazidis. In the Middle Ages, the Cathars were accused of worshiping Satan. Pope Gregory IX said that the Cathars believed God had erred in casting Satan out of heaven. Lucifer would return. On the other hand, the creator god of the material world is... So, Catharism, their take on things is that the creator god of the material world worshipped by the Catholic Church is actually Satan. Wiccans worship Satan. Angel of Death is sometimes confused with Satan. Satanic Panic. So we're just going through the whole thing here. You know, an interesting thing about Satan is either portrayed as extremely ugly or sometimes extremely beautiful. And those are two different interests, and often the beautiful form is associated with the name Lucifer, and the ugly form is associated with the devil, the name devil. And that duality is interesting there. That, and it sort of depends on where you're coming from, right? So someone who believes in order and beauty as being a function of order, you know, if you have symmetry, the symmetry of the face produces beauty. And so Satan is a rebel against order. He's a rebel against beauty, and therefore he's ugly. So that's one take on Satan. But then the other take is that, you know, if you're coming from a sort of a Christian perspective where sexuality is evil and lust is evil, in that case, Satan is going to come as a tempter. He's going to come as a beautiful man. He's going to tempt you and say, hey, you know, you should join me because we've got all the beautiful women and we have all the glory and we have all the power. And so that's how Satan is going to tempt people. So, there are these contradictory ideas of who Satan is. He a Luciferian sort of a person? Is he a devilish sort of person? What exactly is he? And I'm trying to look up the etymology here. The word zabolos, from where we get diabolical, comes from the word diabolo, I slander, and that's just dia, through, and balo, I throw. So I throw slander at you, essentially. So nothing very significant there. How about the term devil? Is that also from the same Greek? It's coming from Old English deophol, from earlier diabul from Latin. Okay, so it's the exact same etymology. That's what I thought. Because anytime, if you're ever going back to the Indo-European, you're going to find a lot of similarity in that devil and diabolical are from the same word. You know, I never knew this about the Yazidis. I was always had a soft spot in my heart for the Yazidis because I like their faces. I think they've got good faces. But I had no clue that they were possibly a Indo-European. Well, I knew they had some connections in their language. The Kurdish language is an Indo-European language. But I had no clue that they were perhaps had this Indo-European type religion. That's pretty interesting. I mean, pretty interesting group of people. You know, I like the Yazidi people. They seem pretty cool to me. Do some Googles on the Yazidis. Save them from genocide. That'd be cool. You know, so we're going back and forth. We're just jumping into a bunch of topics today. Today's not, it's not a very well-rooted day. I don't know what is the cause. What's the cause? Sometimes I come into a video, I have really no plan whatsoever. And then other times there is a plan, or you think there's a plan and then there turns out not to be a plan. We've got a new... Okay, that's nothing at all. You know, Maldoror has been posting some surrealist stuff. He's posting the Magical Order of the Fraternitas Saturni by Hans Horbiger. I'm guessing this is some form of music, or is it a video? I'm gonna have to watch it later. There's text in here talking about Saturn. We could read this. The mythology of Saturn, based upon astrological teachings in the glacial cosmology of Hans Horbiger, in which fire meets ice, moons crash down onto the planets, and the cosmos exists as an eternal battle of opposites. At the beginning of time, darkness was a more powerful primordial element, but the light was contained within it. In order for the light to begin to glow, a logos was required. In our planetary system, it was the logos of the sun, Christos, that brought light, and along with it, life. But the great angel Lucifer, who originally sat at the side of God, grabbed the torch of light, and as a light bringer, Lucifer, and thus the bearer of divine secrets, adjourned to the farthest reaches of the sphere. So this is very Odinic to me. You know, Odin is sort of, he's stealing, or he's acquiring the esoteric knowledge of the runes. His planetary form is therefore Saturn, which in ancient cosmology lies farthest from the sun. Interesting, because, you know, a lot of people accuse Jews of worshipping Saturn. So this is interesting. Lucifer represents Saturn's higher octaves. The sun is the center out of which radiates the entire secret of life. Saturn is the periphery, the border of time and space. Saturn is the place where the last light passes over into darkness. He is therefore considered the guardian of the threshold. So there's a sort of a dualism, sort of a Janus activity there. He's the guardian of the threshold, who opens the door to transcendence and salvation, who guards the realm of the dead. Definitely not the realm of evil. Saturn is the great judge with swords and scales, entrusted with weights, measures, and numbers, which is sort of the original conception of Saturn, or Satan, in the Hebrew, that he's a judge, that he's an accuser. Among human beings, the cult of Saturn corresponds to a path of solitude, maturity, asceticism, difficulties, and suffering, for it is only suffering that makes one mature and noble, but Saturn also means restraint and throwing off of ballast. Above all that of previous religious beliefs, as Grosha emphasizes, the adept of Saturn is further distinguished by austerity, concentration skills, critical faculties, and Uranian abilities of intuition. Uranus is considered the astrological ruler of the age of Aquarius. Secrecy and independence are likewise key words. Human openness is only possible within the chain of the brothers. That's from Hans Thomas Haeckel, The Magical Order of the Fraternitas Saturni, the Moynihan translation. Interesting. All in German. There's all these, oh my gosh, how can I even, it's a bunch of text. It's a huge amount of text. Is he reading? Let's find out. I gotta pause this for a second. What's happening here? Is this just music? This is just music. This is just music and screen caps of a book. So why don't we just read the book instead of posting the screen caps? Alright, so we're going to skip that, and we're going to look at the etymology of Saturn. Why is it, here's a question, why is it that when I search a word, the etymology is not the first thing? You know, Google, that's a problem with Google, is that it is not giving me the etymology as the first response. Google wants to tell me about, you know, material facts. Oh, the composition is this much hydrogen and this much helium. It doesn't want to tell me the Etruscan. So apparently it's from Latin Saturnus, possibly influenced by Latin Satus, past participle of serere, to sow, the god of fertility and agriculture, equivalent to the Greek Kronos, alternative form of Kronos, the youngest of the 12 giants, son of Uranus and Gaia, father to the first generation of Olympian gods and goddesses, possibly from ancient Greek kreno, to rule or command. So satos, to sow, to plant, serere. Saturn. Not a lot of more etymological information there. We don't know a lot about Etruscan. We don't know a terrible amount about Etruscan, unfortunately. But that's interesting. Opening up a lot of threads in terms of... Whoa. Opening up a lot of things here. Not much else in terms of... You know, it's difficult because you got these comment threads, and the comments... If you post a response to another comment, I don't see it. If you just post the comment in itself to a video, not as a response to a comment thread, then I see it pop up. If you want me to see something, that's the way to get... Although the notifications don't always work. What? What? Hector Quinn is white? Are you serious? I simply can't believe anything he says anymore, because I was convinced. Hector Quinn, here's the problem with Hector Quinn. Hector Quinn said, you know, something's wrong with you if you're watching these videos. And I said, you know, I'm sorry you feel that way. I'm sorry you're still watching the videos. And, you know, we started talking about various things that can be problems. And I said, what's your problem, Hector? Are you short? What's your... Because he said one of the problems people can have is they're too short, they're too ugly, they're this... I said, what's your problem? And he said, I'm not white, and that's my problem. And so I left it at that, and some people were asking, oh, they're speculating. And now he says he's white? He was just joking? Hector, you know, I require... This is a channel of no irony. It's a channel of brutal, literal, vertical thinking. I can't, you know, but he has a comment here I haven't seen. I suggest you take your comment, post your comment in response to people, copy paste it, and then post it. It only takes 5 seconds to copy paste it and post it again in the main thread. And that might be confusing to some people, but it's going to make sure your comment, literally, you're posting a comment twice, so it doubles the chances of me seeing it or other people seeing it. So I approve that. I'm not going to delete double comments if you want to leave double comments. But he's saying that the truth is that most white people don't feel oppressed or disenfranchised. Those of us tuned into larger historical and mythological trends feel very deeply what is happening. For the rest of humanity, the forefront of their consciousness is elsewhere. I do believe that whites do experience privilege in their own societies. Even in other societies, though this is mostly for genetic reasons. I recall one conversation in which you stated that gender dynamics, and I feel like I've read this comment before. I feel like this is same thing I've read before and sort of glanced over. We have this good, we have good data on this. Yeah, I know I've read that. The only difference is there's more responses, and that changes how I look at it. Oh my goodness. Explaining how this is possibly good for whites is simply annoying. I found there's a phenomenon where white women hate Asian women dating white men in the same way that white men hate when white women date black men, because implicitly it is a kind of a criticism. When a white man dates an Asian woman, implicitly he's kind of like sending out a message to white women like, hey, you're just not feminine enough, you're not good enough, you'll never be a good enough woman for me. And white women, that really pisses off a lot of white women. Of course, white women who, you know, can get the alpha male or whatever, they're not as upset. But white women who are struggling to find their alpha male, that really messes with them, because they feel like there's this foreign competition coming in and stealing their mating partner. And sort of a lot of white men feel the same way, that like, you know, how can I outcompete in terms of masculinity? And of course, Asian men also face this. How can I outcompete other guys in terms of masculinity? This is not fair. That lack of fairness. You know, I can sympathize with people. I can empathize with people. But unfortunately, when you sympathize and you empathize with people, there's a problem where people think that, you know, if you empathize, for instance, I look at homeless people and I empathize with them. I want to give them money, but I know if I give them money, it's just going to oftentimes feed their drug habit. And I don't want to do that. I think the best thing we could do with homeless people would be to say, hey, you have two options. You can go live in the woods, which is fine. If you want to live in the woods, I'm not going to stop you. But if you're going to go around panhandling and holding up signs saying, oh, I just need money to get a job, feed my family, we're going to take you in, we're going to interview you. And you need to stop being a parasite on people's altruism. And you need to start working. You need to have a job. You need to do something productive. And hey, if that means you're playing the saxophone in a New York subway and people throw you some money, I'm fine with that. If you want to provide live music and entertainment, even if it's the same 2-minute song or 30-second song over and over again, you do that 12 hours a day, I don't care. If that's what you want to do, go ahead. But just holding, you know, asking for people's sympathy, asking for their altruism, that to me is so parasitic. And I did want to talk about the concept of a warrior class as a predatory class versus a merchant class as being a parasitic class. And that this is biological, right? This is not, I mean, people will say things like, you know, merchants are not natural, whereas the warrior is the natural type. But that's not really the case, because we have insects, we have animals that are parasites. And so parasitism is natural. And, you know, the merchant class does exercise a kind of parasitism. Marx identified this when he said the bourgeoisie just skims off the top. Bankers, they just skim off the top. And so that's a legitimate thing to say, but it's not legitimate to say that's not natural, because that exists in the natural world. It's not some otherworldly supernatural thing. So it exists in the natural world. Now, why are we so metaphysically as humans, why are we so opposed to the merchant class instinctually? I think it's because humanity was originally a Paleolithic group of people, and so we look at the merchant class, and the parasitic strategy of the merchant class is antisocial. And we have a problem with that as social creatures. And we instinctively think of the predatory nature of the warrior class as heroic, as bold. But now that the merchant class has taken over the media, they've created this Hollywood mythos that the predatory warrior class is evil, toxic masculinity, and that the merchant class is good and heroic. So, you know, revenge of the nerds type things. So, you know, that's an interesting thing that's going on. We've got Hector Quinn. It's not good for our collective future. I'm getting at how individual men find themselves. Should help us understand. Reflecting on the entitled and empowered. Yeah, okay. All right. Fair enough. So that's, you didn't understand the jumble of words I just said, but I understood what the comment said. That's all that matters. Decentralized system using some sort of cryptocurrency and social status points to incentivize content creation, spreading, and hosting of content sounds like it would be very powerful. Core shell idea. We've possibly already gone over these things. Diversity is a good thing, right? Diversity is good. When I look at the biological world, I see species that are social species like ants or bees, and they have diversity. The queen is diverse. The queen's different from the workers. The workers are different from the drones. So I see that diversity, and I think that's an evolutionarily good strategy. And, you know, I support that. I support diversity. It seems that most civilizations are founded where you have a bunch of diverse populations coming together. For instance, the Nile River Valley, the Indus River Valley, or the Tigris and Euphrates. Those are sort of a meeting of very different, disparate populations coming and meeting together, and they perform different roles in society that allows for specialization, that allows for civilization to emerge. Whereas Northern Europe, where everyone's exactly the same, it's very hard to have civilization because everyone's always competing with each other, and that constant competition prevents anything from being built. It's just this constant social Darwinism prevents any kind of collective action from being taken. Whereas Indus River Valley, Nile River Valley, Tigris, Euphrates, you have a natural aristocracy and a natural working class, I guess you could say. And so there is no competition over who will be the ruler. And that allows for the rulers just to say, hey, let's build a pyramid, or let's build a temple, or let's have a religion, let's make some art. So diversity seems to be a civilizing force, seems to be part of this move away from the Paleolithic toward the Neolithic. This is funny. You know, I don't even know if I can read this comment. I don't even know if I'm allowed to read this comment. And, you know, I'm trying to read the comment, but at the same time, not read the comment. This is the problem. I'm gonna have to skip the comment. So you're never gonna know what that comment was, but we're gonna keep on scrolling around. See, the thing is, here's the problem, guys. Use the word video noggin jogging. So the noggins are jogging. This isn't professional. You can't just start a sentence and then read comments and then go back to your sentence. That doesn't make any sense. This is very low IQ. This video right now is like, people say ADD, but I'm going to call it horizontal thinking. I'm not focused on the task at hand. This is horizontal thinking. I'm not doing vertical thinking, so we're just going to have to close that down. We're going to need to think about what we're saying here. I understand instinct. I understand when you look at the face of a warrior, you think that is a good face, and you look at the face of a merchant and you're like, there's something wrong there. Right? I understand the nostalgia for the Paleolithic era. I understand Ted Kaczynski. I understand these people. And I feel like that's where we all come. It's not just me. It's not just you. It's we're all coming from that place. We all come from that place. We all come from a place where, you know, the blonde-haired, blue-eyed Paleolithic person is the ideal in some sense, but in another sense, we're moving away from that Paleolithic world, and we're moving into a Neolithic world, and then we're moving into a technic world, a world of technics. We're moving into a post-human world. I mean, this seems to be the teleology of human evolution, is that we're sort of a breakaway. I mean, Alex Jones talks about the breakaway civilization. Humanity is kind of Homo sapiens are sort of a breakaway civilization from the rest of the primates, and we're moving towards something radically different. We're moving away from the RNA to the DNA, from the DNA to something different, and we're going into a new place evolutionarily. And the possibilities here are endless. I mean, there's really some potential in here. There's really some unbridled potential. And you look at it, it's quite amazing. But we're going toward a future where we do have this nostalgia for the past. We have this right-wing element where we want to look at beautiful faces and want to say, this is what life is about. Life is about trees, and life is about, you know, beautiful people, and life is about nature, and life is about, you know, the land, to get back to the land and being in tune with nature. That is natural, that is healthy, that is our environment, that's the environment we want to be in. That's the kind of stuff we want to be surrounded by. And that is a right-wing impulse. We're going back to our ancestors and saying this is the way we should live. And I understand that. I think that's a collective experience that we're going through, is that we want to get back to the past because on some level our ancestors are screaming at us like, hey, this is wrong, this isn't how things should be. But we are moving forward nonetheless. I mean, we're being pushed forward by a merchant class into a technological future, into a post-human future. And we're looking at genetic mutations, and we're looking at artificial intelligence. We're looking at a post-human era, and we're scared. And we don't want to die because we want to preserve ourselves. We want to preserve our ancestors and our descendants. We want to continue like that. That's our natural inclination. But the natural inclination for self-preservation, which is the right wing, is coming into conflict with this left-wing merchant class, and is causing all this suffering. And how do you deal with that? How do you overcome that? And you know, there have been people who've come out like Steve Bannon and Trump, and they've said, look, it's not that we're not global. Steve Bannon's a globalist. Trump is a globalist. I mean, these people are fundamentally they're in with the mainstream. You know, they have all the right opinions. But they're saying, look, we need to slow this thing down because people are getting angry. People are reacting. People are getting upset. You have to boil the frog. You can't do it so fast. So in a sense, Steve Bannon, Trump, they are kind of the controlled opposition. They are sort of the right wing of the globalists, where they're saying, hey, look, we can have international markets, we can have free markets, we can have democracy, we can have all these fundamentally left-wing mercantile ideas, we can move toward artificial intelligence, we can move toward genetic engineering, but we need to do it at a slower pace, and we need to take care of the masses. We need to take care of people, we need to keep them happy. We need to offer them sort of spiritual breadcrumbs. We're not going to feed them the bread. We're not going to go back to Paleolithic times, but we can sort of feed them breadcrumbs and say, hey, look, it's not going to change as fast as it was before. Like, we're still going to have transgender people, but they won't be in the military. We're going to have a compromise between the Paleolithic and the post-human. We're kind of in this middle space right now, this conflict space, this struggle space in between the Paleolithic and the future. Or the post-human and the Paleolithic. We're in this conflict space, and Trump and Steve Bannon are coming along and saying, hey guys, look, let's be smart about this. Like, let's slow down the rate of mass immigration. Like, we're still gonna, I mean, under Trump, illegal immigration is higher than ever before under Obama. So I mean, this is incredible, actually. And so we're still gonna have immigration, we're still gonna have globalism, we're still gonna have free trade, we're still gonna have all that, but we're gonna do it like with a nationalist branding. We're going to placate people. We're going to make people happy. And those are really the two sides. They're the people, they're the globalists, they're the transhumanists, and they're people who say, we have to move things into the future. And anyone who opposes us, white people, Christians, men, they all just have to be destroyed. And so this is kind of like Ocasio-Cortez, and this is the new radical wing of the Democrat Party, and people say, you know, if you misgendered trans person, then you should be thrown in jail. So these are radical people, and they're just trying to, you know, go in hard, you know, no preparation, no boiling the frog, just, you know, force feed this down people's throats. And people don't like that, and they're kind of vomiting, they're kind of disgusted, and they're getting angry, and they're pushing back on this. And then you have people like Trump and Bannon who are like, hey, we're still going toward the same telos, we're still going toward the same future, but we need to moderate it, we need to repackage it, we need to rebrand it in a way that tempers people's anger, that diffuses people's anger. This is the way that I see Ronald Reagan, that Ronald Reagan came along in the 80s. People were very upset, people were very angry. And there were a lot of white nationalists at the time who were angry. I mean, there were white nationalist terrorists running around the country. They were shooting people. They were assassinating people. They were robbing banks. They were robbing porn stores. They had millions of dollars as a gang. They were running around. They were violent. And they were successful. And ultimately, it was people like Ronald Reagan who came around and said, no, 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 everything's normal. Everything's under control. You're going to be all right. And so he came in, and the left reacted against him and said, oh, Ronald Reagan's literally Hitler, he's a fascist. And so that made people, you know, and maybe this is a reason I shouldn't use the term right and left, because it is extremely confusing. But let me just finish the diatribe. So, you know, the left-wing people said he was a fascist, so then all the fascists in America said, oh, I guess he's a good guy. And I guess everything's all right. And we have Conan the Barbarian. We have Arnold Schwarzenegger. But look at where that's brought us. I mean, look at Arnold Schwarzenegger today. He's a left-winger. He's basically a Democrat. So we've shifted. The Overton window continues to shift at a more rapid pace. And you have people like Trump and Bannon saying, slow down, slow down. This is becoming an unstable system. This isn't the way to do it. You got to boil the frog. And then you got people like, screw your optics. We're going in. We're going to, you know, Jordan Peterson is a fascist, that sort of thing. And Jordan Peterson's a globalist. I mean, Peterson, Bannon, all these people are about moderating things. They're about controlled opposition. They're about, hey, we need to go boil the frog. And these are your two options. You have boil the frog, or you have just hardcore, who cares about people's feelings? Let's just go balls to the wall, just totally obliterate any form of normalcy, any form of normality, really. That normality is a fascist term, and if you believe in normativity, you're an evil Nazi. And, you know, so that's the contest that's going on here. There's not a third option. There's not like, let's go back to the Paleolithic. So when you understand things in those extreme terms, then you start to understand the teleology that's open to you. I mean, like I said, people can have an anti-life teleology. People can say, let's exterminate all life on Earth. That's not a realistic teleology. That's not going to work out. That's not a realistic goal you can work toward. You can still work toward it. You can still view it as an ideal. You can be fanatical about it. But I don't think it's an effective teleology. I don't think it's a teleology that's really relevant to what's going on. It seems to me that the only teleology is toward a post-human world, and the question is, how are we going to get there? Are we going to get there by boiling the frog with Peterson and Trump and Bannon, who are going to say, you know, we respect trans rights, but they can't be in the military, you know, and then they let things sort of settle down and simmer, and it gets normalized over the next 20 years. And then 20 years they say, we salute our brave transgender soldiers in the military, but those transgenders who hate the military, those are the evil liberals, and we hate those globalists, and we love our patriotic trans people. So, you know, that's what Bannon and Peterson and Trump advocate. They say, look, we can have this transhumanism, but you need to slow down. And then you have people on the hard left, essentially, who are saying, no, balls to the wall, who cares? If anyone opposes us, we'll just call them a white nationalist terrorist, and we'll kill them, or put them in jail or something. We'll censor them. And Alex Jones, I think, is one of these same people who's saying, look, we need to slow down. We can still go toward a transhuman future, but we need to slow down. So, you know, we're still going toward that teleology, and it's not any one person or any group of people or any race or any religion that is putting the system in this direction. This is a 10,000, I mean, this is prior to the existence. The Jewish people haven't existed for 10,000 years. This has been going on for 10,000 years. And we could look at the whole scale of biology and evolution on Earth, and the evolution of Homo sapiens as part of this. So we could extend that number if we wanted to. But let's just look at the 10,000 years of change toward a post-human future is what all this is leading up to. So there's a systemic, technological, mimetic, genetic impulse here that's leading toward a post-human teleology. And sort of my argument is that you can't reverse that. You can't go back. We want to. I mean, instinctively, we want to live in nature. We want to live in a world where humans are of a warrior type and not a merchant type. That's what we want. But they're just structural, class-based, genetic, mimetic things that are bigger than any one of us. They're bigger than any religion, bigger than any race, and that's why you have to have a perennial perspective about these things. You have to zoom out to see the whole picture. I just don't see any other conclusion. Whether you go with Trump, whether you go with the Democrats, I don't see any other conclusion other than a post-human future. And in that post-human future, I do think there's going to be a war between different forms of artificial intelligence, and they will resurrect the spirit of the warrior class, that in some deep sense, these artificial intelligences, they will be of a warrior class. They won't be parasitic, they won't be a merchant class, they will be a warrior class. A post-human warrior class. So that's what I've been arguing for, and I've been trying to shift gears and turn around here, because I've made a lot of videos, and I've been, I mean, this struggle, I call it a global struggle. I call it a 10,000-year long struggle, if not longer. I call it a very long struggle, and it's a struggle that I've been dealing with over the course of months and years, and I've been looking at different ways to evaluate it. And you look at some of recent videos, the Christ Faust and Urban Modernity video. You look at, what's another one? Capitalism and Exclusion, perhaps. Capitalism and Suicide, White Warrior Demonology. I mean, someone can look at a video like White Warrior Demonology and they can presume that I'm trying to resurrect the warrior class. What else can we look at? I'm trying to find a real good one, a real classic. And that's what people say. They say, oh, we want the tone of the channel as it was right in the beginning. The first video I watched was the perfect video, and everything since then has been downhill. Every deviation that you make from the original tone of the channel is a bad thing. Here's another one, European Masculinity in Decline. So you can watch that video and assume that I'm advocating for a return to European masculinity. But I'm not, if we define masculinity from a warrior ethos, I'm not even sure that's possible. And that we might have to go beyond that. If we want to recapture masculinity, it might have to be a post-human masculinity. You know, I talked about Normans and Saxons. That's an old one, Normans and Saxons, European culture wars. Man, this is going to be weird when I delete all these videos and people are like, what videos are, you know, someone's going to watch this video and they're like, what videos are you referencing? I don't see any of these videos on your channel. But, yeah, you know, I've talked about a lot of these issues critically, and I've tried to evaluate them critically and get to the heart of them and discover, is there some sort of alternative to globalism? And my feeling is that, no, there isn't. There isn't really an alternative to globalism. But I have, at the same time that I realize sort of the logical conclusion of our global system for the last 10,000 years is a post-human future, at the same time that I logically recognize that, I still have the ancestors in my brain screaming like, hey, the warrior class is parasitic, the merchant class is parasitic, the warrior class is heroic, and we need to go back to that. We need to go back to nature. We need Varg Vikernes to save us. We need to go in a woods. So I still sympathize with that because it's something that's still in me. And I think everyone to some degree or another confronts this challenge in their own way. Some people might deny it and they say, no, I'm a pure Varg Vikernes, back to the land survivalist. And other people might say, well, you know, in order to achieve our right-wing ideal, we're going to have to have a little subversion, we're going to have to copy a little bit of our enemies, but ultimately it's for a right-wing teleology. But I don't see any... There is a dialectic here. There is a dialectic between right and left. There is a dialectic between the Paleolithic and the post-human. And there's suffering implicit in the dialectic. There's confusion. There's suffering back and forth. People don't like it. People are upset. People are spiritually confused. They're confused. What is the teleology of the world? What is the purpose of all this? What are we going towards? We're headed toward our own destruction. Shouldn't we fight against that? Can we fight against that? Is it something that we should fight against? What is our morality? Is it about preserving ourselves? But what if preservation is only possible through evolution? And then you get into the question of identity. If we evolve into some new species, are we really human anymore? Is that, or should we just try to preserve ourselves in our weakness, or should we try to grow to be somehow beyond human, which is what Nietzsche talked about, right? And I guess, you know, Nietzsche for me is overplayed, and I don't like the social Darwinism that people attach to Nietzsche. I don't like the pithiness and the aphoristic nature of it. You know, you could say that I'm a discursive person, but opposites attract. And I like people who are vertical thinkers. I like people who can stay on topic, and so I can focus in them and get a different perspective rather than reading someone discursive and they're just all over the place. And I'm like, hey, if I wanted a discursive experience, I could just sit alone in a room. I don't need to read your book. So, you know, not a big fan of Nietzsche, but that is an important realization to make back, you know, some 200 years ago or so, 150 years ago. Make this revelation that humanity is headed toward some form of post-human situation. And you can either help that process, you can struggle against it, but it's not really changing the teleology. I don't see any way out of this. I mean, people can say, no, history is cyclical, and we're just going to go back to the way things always were. But that, to me, is like a dinosaur. You know, the environment has changed, the asteroid has you know, impacted the Earth, and the dinosaurs are looking around, everyone's dying, and they're saying, well, you know, history's cyclical. Right now, it looks like the dinosaurs are going extinct, but history's cyclical, I'm sure will return. This is kind of like white people who say, well, you know, white people 500 years ago, we ruled the Earth, and history's cyclical, so right now it looks like we're losing, but I'm sure we're going to come back. I'm not so sure. You know, species live and they grow and they die. And that's a Spenglerian thing. So, you know, I look at that and I say that it's not necessarily the case that the Paleolithic is coming back as this cyclical part of history. Sometimes things really do end in their iteration. Now, I believe in reincarnation in a grand sense, in that the Paleolithic is coming back, but not as a human Paleolithic, but as a post-human Paleolithic. that there will be hunters and gatherers, but they will be artificial intelligence. There will be hunters and gatherers, but they will be post-human. So that's kind of my take here. I think that's enough for now. Thanks for listening. I'll see you again next time. Bye-bye.